Let's piss some people off.
Have you ever noticed that sometimes the right decision can still break your heart? That you can finally leave the relationship, set the boundary, change careers, move to a new city, heal from the past, or become the person you've always wanted to be, and somehow still find yourself grieving. We celebrate transformation, but almost nobody talks about what transformation asks us to leave behind. Because here's the truth: every new version of you requires saying goodbye to an old one. And today, I want to talk about something I wish someone had told me years ago. Sometimes growth doesn't feel like winning, sometimes growth feels like grief. Hi, beautiful souls, and welcome back to I Am Spice, the podcast. I'm your host, Spice, and as always, I am so incredibly grateful that you're here, whether you're listening while you're driving to work, cleaning your house, taking a walk, sitting on your porch with your favorite drink, or maybe you're simply trying to make sense of a season of life that feels both exciting and confusing. Thank you for allowing me to spend this time with you guys. Every week, we come together to have honest conversations about healing, confidence, relationships, personal growth, purpose, and what it really means to build a life that feels authentic. Not perfect, because perfection has never been the goal. The goal has always been becoming more of who we were created to be. If these conversations have encouraged you in any way, I have one small favor to ask. Please take a moment to follow the podcast, subscribe if you're watching on YouTube, leave a review, and share this episode with someone you love. Every review, every follow, and every share helps these conversations reach someone who may desperately need to hear them today. You never know when one sentence, one reminder, or one conversation might become the thing that changes someone's life. Thank you for being here. Now, let's talk. Last week, we talked about something that I think so many of us needed to hear. We talked about the pressure of feeling like we have to have everything figured out before we are allowed to move forward. We talked about how courage isn't having all the answers, it's being willing to take the next step even when you don't. And after I finished recording that episode, I kept thinking about what usually happens next. What happens after you decide to change? Because deciding to change is only the beginning. Nobody really prepares us for what comes after. We hear people say things like, follow your dreams. We romanticize this so much. We say, heal, become the best version of yourself, choose yourself, start over. And all of that sounds very beautiful. It sounds inspirational, empowering, almost like magical. But we forget how it makes us feel. But very few people also tell us what those things actually feel like while we're living it, while we're living all these feelings. Because here's what I've discovered: sometimes becoming the person you've always wanted to be feels surprisingly painful. Not because you're making the wrong decision, but not because you're moving backward, not because you have failed, but because every transformation asks us something to leave behind. It asks us to let go. And letting go, even when it's healthy, can still hurt. And we're allowed to feel that. We're allowed to feel that way. I think we've accidentally created this idea that growth should always feel exciting. That once you finally leave the unhealthy relationship, you should only feel relief. That once you finally start healing, you should only feel peace. That once you finally start living authentically, you should only feel happiness. But life isn't that simple. Human emotions aren't that simple. Sometimes you can feel relief and sadness at exactly the same time. Sometimes you can know you're making the right decision while your heart still aches for what you're leaving behind, and that's totally fine. And I don't think we talk about that enough, because when those feelings show up, we often assume something must be wrong with us, something must be wrong inside of us. We think, maybe I'm making a mistake, maybe I wasn't ready yet, maybe I should go back. But what if those emotions aren't evidence that you're moving in the wrong direction? What if they're simply evidence that you're human? I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever moved out of a house you loved? I know there's plenty of people. Maybe it wasn't even your dream house. Maybe it had problems. Maybe it held difficult memories. But on the day you locked the door for the last time and you left that house, you cried anyway. Not because you wanted to stay, but because an entire chapter of your life ended at that very moment, right there. Or maybe you watch your child grow up like I have. Like, we celebrate every milestone, the first steps, the first day of school. We celebrate graduations, watching them become independent. As parents, we're proud, we're excited, and we wouldn't want them to stay little forever. And yet, sometimes we still find ourselves missing the little person they used to be. That is normal. That doesn't mean you want to go backwards. It simply means that every new beginning quietly says goodbye to something else. I think life is full of those moments on every single aspect. We just don't always recognize them as grief, because when most people hear the word grief, they immediately think about death or losing someone we love, attending a funeral, saying goodbye forever. But grief is so much bigger than that. Grief is the emotional response to loss, any loss. The loss of a relationship, the loss of a dream, the loss of certainty, the loss of innocence, the loss of the future you thought you were going to have next to the other person or just by yourself, even the loss of the person you used to be. And maybe that's why growth feels so complicated, because while one part of you is excited about what's ahead, another part of you is quietly mourning what you're leaving behind. I don't think we give ourselves permission to acknowledge that. Instead, we rush ourselves. We tell ourselves just to move on, just to be grateful, just to focus on the future. But healing has never responded well to being rushed. Sometimes your heart needs a moment to catch up to the decision your mind already knows it's right. And there's nothing weak about that. In fact, I think it's one of the most courageous things we'll ever do. To honor where we've been without allowing it to determine where we're going. That is one of the biggest things we could do, because here's something I've been learning lately. Growth isn't just about becoming someone new. It is also about lovingly saying goodbye to the version of yourself that carried you this far. And maybe that's why it hurts. Not because that version of you was meant to stay forever, but because she fought so hard to get you here. Have you ever thought about that? Have you ever thought about it that way? One of the biggest lies I used to believe was this: if I miss it, maybe I should go back. Have you ever thought of that? You finally leave something that wasn't healthy. Maybe it was a relationship, maybe it was a friendship, maybe it was a job that slowly drained the life out of you. And maybe it was a version of yourself that spent years trying to make everyone else comfortable while quietly abandoning yourself. You finally walked away. And then there it is. A few weeks later, or a few months later, you start missing it. You remember the good moments. You remember what felt familiar. You remember the routines, the jokes, the traditions, the comfort, how familiar everything felt. And suddenly your mind starts whispering, maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I overreacted. Maybe I should go back. I think almost every human being has experienced that at some point when making a decision of leaving something behind, whatever it might be. But here's what I've learned. Missing something is not the same thing as being meant for it. Let me say that again, because I think somebody needs to hear that today. Missing something is not the same thing as belonging there. Sometimes we confuse nostalgia with direction. We mistake familiarity for purpose. We assume that because our heart aches, our feet should turn around. But they aren't the same thing. I miss being a kid sometimes. I miss having fewer responsibilities. Who doesn't? I miss people who are no longer here. I miss seasons of my life that I know I'll never experience again. That doesn't mean I'm supposed to go backwards. It simply means that these chapters mattered. And I think we need to normalize that, because somewhere along the way, we started believing that healing meant never looking back. And that's not what it is. That if we were truly over something, we'd never miss it again. I don't think that's true. I think healthy people still miss things. They just don't let missing something make their decisions for them. That's the difference. I recently heard someone say something that stopped me in my tracks. They said, your brain is designed to prefer what's familiar, not necessarily what's good for you. Think about that. Your brain's first priority isn't happiness, it's survival. And for thousands of years, survival depended on recognizing who and what was familiar. Familiar meant predictable. Predictable meant safer. So your brain developed this incredible ability to cling to patterns, even unhealthy ones. That's why people stay in relationships that hurt them most of the time. That's why we repeat family patterns we promised ourselves we'd never repeat. That's why we sometimes create and recreate chaos without even realizing we're doing it. Because our brains often confuse familiar with safe. But familiar and safe are not always the same thing. Some of us grew up in homes where criticism was totally normal. So encouragement feels suspicious. Some people grew up believing love had to be earned. So healthy love feels uncomfortable. Some people feel so accustomed to living in survival mode that peace almost feels boring. Have you ever noticed that? Sometimes when life finally becomes calm, we start looking around waiting for something to go wrong. And that is normal, not because something actually is wrong, but because our nervous system isn't used to peace. It's used to preparing for danger. And I think that's one of the hardest parts about healing from anything. Your soul knows you're moving towards something healthier, while your nervous system keeps asking, are you sure? It's like one part of you is finally breathing while another part is still holding its breath. I think, and I like to think about it this way, I imagine you live next to a train track your entire life. Every single day, the train comes by. It's loud. It shakes the windows. It interrupts conversation. It trembles the floor. It's annoying. But after years, you stop noticing it. Your brain adapts. The noise becomes normal. Your nervous system gets used to it. Now imagine you move to a quiet little cabin in the woods where there's no trains, no noise, just silence and the nature, and you think the silence would immediately feel peaceful. But no, for the first few nights it probably wouldn't, because you're already used to chaos. The silence might actually feel uncomfortable. Isn't that crazy? Maybe even unsettling, not because silence is dangerous, but because it's unfamiliar. Eventually, your nervous system adjusts once again, and one day you'll hear the train again somewhere else, not near your house. Instead of feeling comfort, you'll wonder, how did I ever sleep through that? How was I able to sleep through all that mess, through all that noise? Healing works like that. At first, peace can feel unfamiliar. Boundaries can feel selfish. Healthy relationships can feel strange. Rest can make you feel guilty. Receiving love without having to earn it can almost feel uncomfortable. Not because those things are wrong, but because they're new. And growth almost always feels unfamiliar before it feels natural. I also think we need to talk about the stories we tell ourselves after we leave something behind, which is very, very important, because our memories are interesting. Our memories, they're beautiful, but they're quite selective. When we miss someone, our minds often replay their highlight reel. We remember the vacations, the laughter, the good conversations, the little traditions. We rarely replay the nights we cried ourselves to sleep, the anxiety that we felt next to that person, the loneliness, the moments we felt invisible. Our minds have this fascinating way of editing the movie in our brain. It keeps the beautiful scenes and quietly fades out the painful ones. That's why nostalgia can be so convincing. It feels like a true story, just not the whole story. And sometimes healing means being honest enough to remember the entire picture. Not to become better, not to stay angry, but simply to remain truthful to yourself, because truth is what really protects us at the end of the day. Maybe that's why becoming someone new feels so confusing. One part of you is excited about what's ahead. Another part of you is grieving what you've known. And somewhere in the middle, you're learning one of its life's greatest lessons. You can miss a chapter of your life without wanting to live there again. You can appreciate who someone was without inviting them back into your future. You can love the person you used to be while recognizing that she no longer has to carry the weight she's been carrying all these years. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not pretending that the past never mattered, but thanking it, learning from it, and gently placing it where it belongs. And that's behind you. As I was thinking about this episode, one image kept coming back to me. And that is, imagine you're climbing a mountain. You start at the bottom while carrying a backpack. Inside the backpack are all the things you've collected through your life. Some of them are beautiful, some of them kept you alive, some of them protected you, and some of them you simply been carrying for so long that you've forgotten that they're even there. As you continue climbing, the trail becomes steeper, it becomes harder, the air gets thinner, the climb gets harder on your body, and eventually you realize something. The backpack that helped you survive the beginning of the journey, it's becoming too heavy to carry to the top. Now, here's the interesting part. The backpack isn't bad. It served its purpose while you needed it. It carried what you needed when you needed it. But right now, the higher you climb, the more you realize that what helped you survive one season of your life may keep you from thriving in the next. I wonder how many of us are exhausted, not because life is asking too much of us, but because we're still carrying versions of ourselves that we've already outgrown. The people pleaser, we outgrown the perfectionist, the version of you that believed your worth came from being productive, the version that apologized for taking up space, the version that thought love had to be earned, the version that believed resting was laziness, the version that stayed quiet to keep everyone else comfortable. Maybe those versions of you weren't weaknesses. Maybe they were survival strategies. And I think that's an important distinction. Because when we judge who we used to be, we miss the opportunity to understand her instead of asking, why was I like that? Maybe we should ask ourselves, what was she trying to protect? That question changes everything, because suddenly you're no longer looking at yourself, at your younger self with frustration. You're looking at her with compassion. I realized something else. We spent so much time trying to become a new person that sometimes we forget to thank the old one. Think about that for a second. The version of you who stayed awake worrying about everyone else got you here. The version of you who worked 3 times harder because she didn't think she was enough was the one who got you here. Have you ever thought about it that way? The version of you who survived heartbreak, rejection, that survived loss, that survived the disappointments, the grievances, the betrayal, the fear. She's the one that got you here. She may not be the person who will lead you into your future, but she deserves to be honored for bringing you at least this far. Have you ever thought about it that way? Sometimes I imagine sitting across from in every previous version of myself, and there's a lot of them. The scared little girl, the insecure teenager, the young adult trying to prove her worth, the woman who kept giving people one more chance because she believed love meant sacrificing herself. I want to hug every one of them, to be honest. Not because I want to become them again, no, but because I understand why they existed. They were doing the best they could with what they knew at the moment, with the information that they had at the moment. And maybe you need to hear that about yourself today. Maybe the version of you that you're embarrassed by is actually the version that deserves your deepest compassion, because she didn't know what you know right now. She didn't have the tools that you have right now. One of the most beautiful things about healing is that it doesn't ask us to hate our past, in case you didn't know. It asks us to understand it. I don't think healing sounds like, I can't believe I wasted all those years with that person. I think healing sounds more like, now I understand why I stayed. There's such a difference between shame and understanding. Shame keeps us stuck. Understanding sets us free. Because once you understand your patterns, you stop believing that they are your identity. They're simply behaviors you learned along the way. And what is learned can also be unlearned. There's another misconception I think we need to let go of. We often imagine that becoming a healthier person means you'll stop feeling afraid. That confidence means fears disappears. That healing means you'll never have difficult days again. Let me tell you something. That's not been my experience at all. I don't think courage is the absence of fear. I think courage is having a conversation with fear instead of letting it drive the car. Fear can have a seat right next to me. It just doesn't get the steering wheel anymore. I love that image because that's what healing feels like for me. And it has felt like for me all these years. Fear still speaks sometimes. Self-doubt will still whispers. Old stories still knock on the door. But they no longer get to decide where my life goes. Because I've learned something incredibly freeing. Just because that thought visits you doesn't mean it deserves residency. Just because an old version of you says you're not enough doesn't mean she's right. It just means she's remembering a world that no longer exists. Maybe that's why growth feels so emotional. You're not just changing your habits, you're changing your relationship with yourself. You're learning to trust your own voice, to believe your own instincts, to choose yourself without apologizing for it. And that is sacred work. And sacred work takes time, which brings me to something I hope you'll carry with you long after this episode ends. You don't have to become completely a different person. You don't have to become a completely different person. You don't have to erase your past. You don't have to pretend the old version of you never existed, because she did. She mattered. She was necessary. She survived things that today's version of you no longer has to survive. So take time to honor her. Take time to thank her. Take time to love her, and then let her rest. That's what we should do with our old self, because she has carried enough. The person sitting here today, this person, the wiser, the stronger, more self-aware version of you, is ready to carry the story from here on. So before we end today's conversation, I want to leave you with a question. Not because I need the answer, but because maybe your heart does. If you could sit down with a version of yourself from 5 years ago, or 10 years ago, or maybe even 20 years ago, what would you say to them? Would you criticize them, or would you thank them? Would you tell them everything they did wrong? Or would you wrap your arms around them and say, you did better than you even realized. You carried more than anyone knew. You kept going when giving up would have been easier. Thank you for getting us here. Maybe that's the conversation. That's the conversation you've needed to have all along. Not one filled with regret about the things you've done in your life, but one filled with compassion. Because healing isn't about becoming someone worthy of love. Healing is realizing you've always been worthy of love, even while you were still learning on how to do things. So if no one has reminded you lately, let me be the one to do so. The person you're becoming will cost you the person you used to be. And that's okay. Because every beautiful chapter asks us to turn the page. Not because the previous chapter wasn't important, but because the story isn't over yet. Don't be afraid to grieve the life you're leaving behind. Don't be afraid to miss people who helped shape you. Don't be afraid to honor the version of yourself that fought so hard to survive. Just don't confuse gratitude with permission to stay where you've already outgrown, because you have done so. You weren't created to spend your life living in yesterday. You were created to keep becoming. One brave decision, one honest conversation, one boundary, one act of self-love, one day at a time. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today, guys. I appreciate you so much. If this conversation touched your heart, I hope you'll share it with someone who may be grieving a version of themselves they no longer need to be. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is the reminder that they're allowed to grow without feeling guilty for it. Until the next time, I love you guys bunches. And remember this. You can love the person you used to be without living as them forever. Honor your past, embrace your present, trust your future. I love you guys. I'm rooting for you. I believe in you guys. And I'll see you in the next episode of I Am Spice, the podcast. Love you bunches.
And remember, we're unfiltered, unapologetic, and unstoppable. That's that.